Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Ventures Podcast. I'm excited about today's episode with Crystal Berger. Her story is incredibly inspiring, and her journey as an entrepreneur actually is very important for all of us to consider as we think about just the polarization in our country, in our world right now, between opposing voices that seem to get more and more extreme in different directions. So I've always been on the hunt. I've always been on the lookout for people and entrepreneurs that are addressing this conversation from different angles. And so Crystal is approaching it by starting her company, EBO, Expert Bookings Online. And she's approaching it by all the media and content people out there that are producing content. They're producing TV content, radio, et cetera. How are they presenting diverse perspectives to their audiences? How are they finding and becoming more inclusive so that the experts that they bring onto their shows actually can represent different perspectives? So this conversation is incredibly enlightening, at least for me. I hope it is for you as well. So if you're watching, you can also listen anywhere that you get your podcast. You can just search for Ventures. And if you're listening, you can also actually watch a video by visiting wclittle.com. There you'll see more show notes and links to different things that we talk about today. So with that, please enjoy this conversation with Crystal Berger. All right, Crystal, welcome to the show.
Hi, Will. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here with you today.
I'm pretty fired up about this conversation for a wide variety of reasons, but I think just the story about where you've come from and what you're up to now is just endlessly fascinating. And for the entrepreneurs, investors listening in, I'm sure that there's some insight, some wisdom that I'm excited to ask you about. So if you wouldn't mind just kicking us off, tell us a little bit about your story, where you've come from and what you're up to now.
Well, I am probably the most non-traditional founder that you will ever meet in your life, right? I tell everyone I'm a journalist turned innovator. I worked in network news for 10 years as a senior booking producer and also as a national features host. So I had a national news feature that aired on SiriusXM and also aired in 1,300 homes, Fox affiliates nationwide. And I also had a national podcast. And so I started in that space, but I realized my time in the newsroom, I was the only African-American woman in my newsroom for that entire decade. And I always was bringing in the diversity into the newsroom. And I always thought to myself, well, what happens when I'm no longer in this seat? What's going to happen with the conversations that I'm creating? Who's going to be the go-to source for those things? And so that was like the starting point of when I realized there had to be ways that we could use technology to really address a lot of the inefficiencies, but also the inequity in conversations that we were hearing across all media land, media platforms. And so that's like a high level overview, yeah. But look, I'm a girl from West Baltimore, grew up, born and raised in Baltimore City, single parent family. My mom worked 2 p.m. to 10 p.m. every single day. So we always had to be innovative, if to say the least, growing up, and to make things work out for the best while she was providing for us. So, I have a layered story. So feel free to jump in any of those places and ask anything you like, for sure.
So, all right, well, let's jump into the childhood a little bit there. I'm always curious about the entrepreneurial stories of founders as they're starting things. For you, did you have sort of an innate entrepreneurial, was that sort of in your DNA as a person, or is that something you felt like was adapted, or maybe a hybrid? Like how would you answer the question around, like, have you always been an entrepreneur?
So I love this question because I am an entrepreneur at heart, right? So my parents were married. They divorced when I was about 8. I think one of the biggest challenges in their marriage was my mother went to college, very traditional, worked for Baltimore City, and my dad was an entrepreneur. He was starting his business. He was a country boy from a small town right outside of Fayetteville, North Carolina. And I think the mindsets were very different, as far as how you build a family and a life. My dad grew up in the South, the conservative South. He was a sharecropper, and he has had 8 siblings, and they all worked the field. So my grandfather owned 14 acres of land, and they worked the tobacco, right? And so he grew up in an entrepreneurial home.
Mm.
And so, of course, he was going to have his own entrepreneurial spirit. And so he had a contracting company when he and my mother met. So my mom was more like the brains, my dad was the business. But I believe a lot of the conflict came in when, business goes up and down, and especially when you're starting out, it's a hustle, it's a struggle. And so they had 2 very young children. My mom was working her 2 to 10, and my dad was figuring it out. And so I believe that seeing the conflict of what it looked like financially was something that made me kind of resist some of the relational things when it comes to business, like mixing business and, your personal life. But it also showed me that, sometimes your vision and your dream might not be aligned with the people that you really love. And so that was a big piece of that my story, where I saw someone who was starting a business and building a brand. And I ended up to kind of supplement my income. When I was young, I used to do hair in my mom's basement from the age of 12 all the way through high school. And I used to have a composition notebook with all of my appointments. And so, but these are the things that I saw my dad do when I was really young. He had a little composition notebook, and he would put his meetings in, he would go see his clients. And so for me, I think I saw it and didn't really realize it because he did leave the home when I was 8. So I wasn't around it as much as I probably would have been otherwise.
Okay, so you are a true entrepreneur of entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
So working in a newsroom for a decade and
Mm,
bringing lots of different perspectives to the table.
mhm,
How were you able to leverage your entrepreneurial skills, that drive to kind of add value in
mm.
that newsroom?
That was a challenge, Will, because I am an entrepreneur, right? And so I wanted to not just be, an employee of
Yeah,
Fox News, right?
yeah.
I wanted to speak at conferences and, sell my book because I have a book. And more oftentimes than that, I was in HR. I was in HR having these conversations about what are you doing,
Yeah.
and it's crazy because when I went to the network, and this is like my third career in life, um, I was doing some media consulting with some professional athletes before going to the network. And I remember having my old consulting email, and I emailed the woman in HR from my consulting email one day, just like randomly. It's like my first year at the network. And she was like, she calls me at HR and she says, Crystal, what is this consulting company that you have? And I'm like, oh, that's before I got here. And she was like, are you sure? Because you can't do that while you're here. And that was the first reality check from me, like, oh, you no longer have permission to be you in this space, in that way. And so it was a interesting journey because entrepreneurship had taught me how to network a lot, right? So I brought that research, that resource to the network. And especially in my role, I was able to make relationships easily. I was able to nurture them as well. And so that benefited the platform significantly, but it was always a struggle because I am one of those people, which you probably are learning. I don't really take no for an answer. And so when, when the network would say, well, Crystal, you can't do this. And I'm like, but why can't I? And I would fight them on it,
Mhm.
like, how is this impacting the brand and how does this benefit the brand? So I found myself also in these conversations negotiating to show them the value of the work that I was doing outside of the network and how it benefited the network. So I would say it tied and played in a lot of ways, but I did have a lot of moments of internal conflict as an entrepreneur because I didn't like asking for permission to do things.
So in the newsroom, you're bringing diverse perspectives. It sounds like your day to day was to just find the people who would come on to these shows. Was it multiple shows, or were particular shows you were working with, or what? What was that like?
It was every show with the network.
Every
So,
show.
yeah. So, what I did was, so my primary role was as affiliates coordinator and a booking producer. So, what I would do, I would get up at 4 in the morning, get into the newsroom. I would read in. I would pick the top 3 national news stories of the day, and we would do write ups and put talking points to those write ups, and then we would find subject matter experts to speak on those topics. And then I would send that out to all of our affiliates by 5 a.m. And they would book their guests through my desk, so it was multiple things. So really boots on the ground, it was like we were influencing every conversation from, Miami, Florida to Wisconsin to everywhere across the US. And so it was an interesting thing because, I got to meet so many amazing people with just uniquely different stories and experiences that were drastically different than mine, growing up in West Baltimore. And so it was an interesting experience in the newsroom, but that was my primary role, to pick the stories, send out the experts on those stories, and then book the guests on those stories nationwide.
Got it. Okay. So now one level deeper, why, for you personally, why would bringing diverse perspectives and all different definitions of diversity, why is that so important to you? Because obviously this sort of tee ups to the EBO story, which we'll get to, but I'm just curious to kind of maybe go a level deeper. Why is this an important conversation and topic for you?
Because I realized that, everyone has a unique story. I think that's what I loved about being a journalist and hosting content. It was because, we have so much more in common than we have different, right? But it's about being able to access that perspective, right? And that experience, because most of us grow up in communities, right, that would look like us, right? It's very rare that you're in a multi-ethnic, multiple socioeconomic status environment. And so for me personally, I realized, even just being in that newsroom, some of my colleagues, I was their first Black colleague. I was their first female Black colleague, right? Or even friend, because I have some friendships that have lived on past the network. And I knew that when you have these conversations and you make the conversation more diverse, even if you agree to disagree, it gives you a different insight on the world that you would have never had if you hadn't had that conversation. And so for me, I'm just so committed to people of different experiences, different political affiliations, really talking about what makes us different, but more importantly, where do we meet to, in this equation. And what I learned is most of us want to feel safe. Yeah. Most of us want to feel free, and most of us want to feel loved. Right. And if we can understand that that's the common thread that really unites our country, for me, that's critical. And so I just enjoy, one experience I had, I interviewed a friend of mine. He's a New York Times bestseller. He grew up in East Baltimore, and he has a book called Living and Dying in America. Right. And it was a story about his story growing up in Baltimore. And he was talking about how when he was a boy that they would go and play basketball on the court to East Baltimore, and the police would come and strip them down and make them lay face down on the ground on the basketball court. And I interviewed him about his New York Times bestseller. And one of my radio affiliates called me and he said, "Crystal," white boy, I think he was in Idaho. He said, "Crystal, I never knew." And he had this authentic compassion and empathy because he heard Dee's story. And he said, "I couldn't imagine being a 10-year-old me playing on the playground with my friends as a boy and being stripped down for no reason." And so having that type of influence, nationally really matters to me, because I know that it's those stories that make us more human, that make us more compassionate, but also more effective, Will, so I could go on and on.
No, keep going. I mean, this is super inspiring. I'm ready to vote for whatever you're doing, whatever you're doing next. So given that this is a show about entrepreneurship and venture building, entrepreneurs, investors listening in, watching in, what is the story now of what you're up to now? What is coming from the newsroom and what you were doing? Tell us about EBO. What's the origin story? And we'll go from there.
Sure. So the origin story is one, I never thought I would be a tech founder. Let me say that at all. But one day something happened at the White House. News broke, but I had went to the restroom. Really quick story. Went to the restroom. I was gone for maybe about 5 minutes max. And I came back and my managing editor, he was like, "Crystal, oh my God, where did you go? We need a guest for anchor coverage. We need to get someone on air right now." So this day I was not feeling it well. I was like, I'm not for this today. And I went back to my desk. I found a gas, got the gas on air in maybe about 2 minutes, about 2 minutes. And I remember having this conversation. Anybody knows me, I am a Christian, so I'm a believer. And so I remember going back to my desk saying, God, why do you still have me in this seat? These people can't even book a guest without me sitting here. And I say that it was the voice of God saying to me, because I want you to automate the work that you do. I
Hmm.
was like, what? Correct. I had that expression as well. I said, what? And that day, I remember sitting down and just writing down all of my processes for being efficient, that I had to learn on my own, that I had to just bring to that platform.
Wow.
And after I wrote down all of my processes, I was like, okay. And so I started to call friends at other networks and say, hey, do you use a system to, book your guests? And everybody's like, no, I hate booking guests. It takes me forever. It's the most irritating part of my job. All of these things. And I was like, okay. And so I started to do some research and really saw that there was a tool for efficiency. And so I kind of started to play around and take some product management classes. I did the wrong thing and took a coding class once, and I was like, oh no, this is not for Crystal. But I took it, and I learned that that wasn't my lane in the space. And so that's how the idea of EBO originated.
So I love what you said earlier. That it was love, safety, and freedom. That right. That everybody inherently wants those. And I love the 1, 2, 3. It's an easy thing to remember. And part of the reason why that's so inspiring is because the world is desperate for that right now. It's desperate for voices that are trying to bring people together, share each other's stories, so that we can establish empathy for each other. It seems like that's so obvious at face value, yet we're seeing less and less and less of that
Mm.
uh, across not only America but in nations around the world. And
Mm.
so the nuts and bolts of EBO, as they sort of tie into the big picture why and vision and everything, I think that's going to get a lot of people excited that are listening in. The nuts and bolts of EBO is what? Like fundamentally, what are you building? And
Mhm.
and yeah, and what is the outcome that you're hoping to achieve?
Yeah, for sure. So the tagline is actually a three-word combo. It's fast, efficient, and inclusive, right?
Mm.
That's the premise of the work that I'm doing, right? Like, so I realized that there was so much friction in the manual processes of actually finding guests, right? Meaning,
Yeah.
even if my colleagues who were predominantly white men, 40 and over, right? Even if they wanted a diverse perspective, they couldn't find that person quickly, right? So that's the
Mhm.
fast piece, right? If they had to find it, they had to outsource or do a lot of research to find that person. And then the efficiency piece was, how can we get these people on air in a streamlined way and do it in a consistent manner, right? And then the inclusive piece is when you address the efficiency side, that ultimately lends itself to um, inclusion, right? Or the inclusive piece of the
Mhm.
conversation. So for me, being able to access someone quickly, no matter what their color was, no matter what their political affiliation was, like if you're looking at subject matter expertise and you just want the facts, right? You're not really looking for opinion, you're looking for facts. That person could look and feel like anything, right? As long as they have the expertise. And so essentially what the product does is it streamlines all of those processes, and it's on demand, and we use intelligence and all of these other things to find that right person for the topic and for the subject matter, which also lends itself to getting a more diverse perspective versus the default. I just go to who's in my Rolodex. I just go to who I went to college with or who sits on the board of this company. Right now, you can really find anybody on any topic, around the world. And so that's how it kind of ties in. So fast, efficient, and inclusive, because once you're fast and efficient, it's going to lend itself to inclusivity.
So then a key thing I'd imagine about the job is the trust network, right? How, if you're going to move fast and you're going to tap into a network, how are you going to solve the trust problem if they don't necessarily know, or are you just building it out? So people are going to know you and they're going to know that you're building this thing and it's going to be quality, or how are you thinking about it?
That's part of it, right? I can say that I did earn a great reputation, in media of being a trustworthy source for these types of conversations and perspectives. But also, we have vetting, which we're going to be doing and building into the technology to where there's certain, I would say, benchmarks of, are you ready to go on air? Can you deliver, right? So we have a vetting scorecard that we're creating within the technology to ensure that the people are ready for media visibility. Yep.
That's good. That's good. Okay. So then is the use case this content producer, like the booking producer at 5 a.m. releasing a thing coming on, like who's using it? What does the process look like as they're putting shows together or content?
Yep, for sure, for sure. So it's a two-sided platform. So it's a B2B and a B2C. And so on the B2C side, those are all the subject matter experts, right? Who are looking for media exposure. They should be on air. They just don't have the relationship, right, to get them on air, right? Because that's where the whole idea of breaking barriers to entry in media, it's really about who do you know, right? Yeah. And so what you and I both know is it's not even what you know, and you meet diverse founders, or not even diverse founders, just founders in general, who have a great story, they have a great product or a great idea, but they don't know the right person to help them make it happen, right? It's the same thing in media. So on the B2C side, like, we are the person to help make it happen if you can't afford a publicist, right? Or if your publicist has a limited reach, right? Your publicist typically has relationships with certain media outlets. So what we're saying is, hey, your clients can actually get a grander and larger and broader reach by using us, because we no longer just have access to the local ABC station. Now you have access to all of the ABC stations and the Fox stations and and the NBC stations around the world, right? So that's that side. On the B2B side, what we're saying to content creators, and this could be anywhere from podcast producers or content creators, right? Because we know that podcasts exploded during the pandemic. It went from like 850,000 podcasts to 2 million podcasts, right? Just during the pandemic. And so those content creators, we're talking about local radio and TV, and we're also talking about national networks. And a unique use case that in my process of doing research was that there are all of these online communities, right, that offer content to their members, right? And they're always looking for subject matter experts as well. And they face a unique DEI challenge. A lot of, again, these communities may want to have these conversations. They may want to bring in different perspectives from folks that are that aren't within their community. And so what we do is connect them to diverse subject matter experts as well.
So important. It is hard to overstate how important this is. How are you going to maintain quality? So in fact, maybe even to help answer the question, how do the booking agents or the booking producers right now maintain quality for their shows? And how will that change or not change with EBO?
That's a great question. Right now, again, it's like kind of going to that default of what you know and who you know, right? So it's like the same conversations, which like I know, it's like you turn on the news or you listen to it in the car, you're like, why do they have this guy on again, right? That person is trusted, right? And so you know that they're going to deliver, even though it's not the best expert, right, for that particular topic. So the quality is there, but it's still not colorful, right? It's still not significantly compelling, because you're using the same people all the time, right? And like I know, we live in a world of variety, right? So for me, the way we want to maintain integrity is to ensure that we vet our experts extensively, right? And by, again, using that scorecard, but also what I do foresee in the near future, because we haven't launched, we're still building and all that kind of stuff, I do want to offer in-app educational opportunities, meaning, have a lot of affiliate partners that do media coaching and training for experts who may have the credentials, right? But they're not necessarily ready to go on air.
Yeah.
Right. And so establishing those high level quality relationships, or even giving publicists access to our Rolodex to actually work with clients to help them build their messaging and their talking points and even press releases. And so I'm really looking at building out a really strong affiliate partner community to do that, to ensure that the quality is maintained. But right now, I mean, as you've seen from my decks and things like that, I have a lot of dope, amazing experts, within the system that we're looking to deploy to different media outlets. And so it's going to start there. And then we definitely are going to use an extensive vetting technology to ensure that we get the best perspectives on air. For the best conversations, for sure.
Okay. So if I'm a producer, even if thinking my own little show here, I like that. If I'm looking for an expert on, let's say, China or or Kenya or on oil or on any particular topic, will I be able to just go in and search and then see a bunch of profiles and then have some kind of trust signaling, or how will that experience look like if I'm
Yeah.
yeah.
You can put in key terms and you can find people will populate based upon what your interests are, right? Because you fill out your profile and you have your interests as well. So you get suggested experts. You'll get just a database of people that meet the credentials that you put in as well. But also you can actually view their profiles within the system, right? So you can see their media reels, you can see their talking points. There are also opportunities for experts to comment on different conversations that are trending in the news, right? So then you can see their perspective prior to booking them. And then again, the other piece of that is the scheduling. So no one will populate that's unavailable during the time that you want to book them. So if you want to book them at 2 p.m. on a Wednesday, if that person's unavailable, they wouldn't populate because we want it again to be an on-demand solution. So you can book them right then and there if that's when you need them.
And that's made it click in my head why it's so important for you to do the training, because actually the full vision, if you're able to be as inclusive as possible, you're going to find subject matter experts all around the world that have the right credentials, but like you said, are going to need training that they may not have worked with a publicist before. They don't know all the terms that you just mentioned in terms of what they need to have on their profile or how to even be trained up to do that so that they can have those voices. And again, I just come back to, it's so important because as people are consuming media in whatever form of media they're consuming it, if they're just hearing the same talking heads and the same perspectives over and over and over again, that is just going to contribute to the division that we see all across the media and social conversations right now. So,
absolutely.
yeah. So now I'm curious. Okay. And this might be just from a experience from your background, running a show, being in a newsroom, having all the experiences that you have. This is now, again, a little bit of a deeper question. Where have you seen civil conversation, opposing viewpoints, people actually premise, conclusion, using logic to form argument and then actual civil debate? Does that exist anymore? Or from different perspectives? Tell me, can we find that somewhere?
I'm sure it exists somewhere. But the thing is, Will, right? So media is still a business, right? And I always tell people, you can't have a story without conflict, right? That's the premise. We learned that in middle school when we started writing, stories, right?
Right.
So conflict, right? You need to have an opposing perspective to really even eliminate some of the fallacies in your argument, right? And so I just believe that giving people the opportunity to being heard, right? And found first, and then will allow your audience to make their own decision, because that is the biggest fallacy when you talk about indoctrination, right? It's usually just this one perspective, right? That's heard on whatever side of the aisle you're on. And it's never an opposing view. But when you can have the conflict and you can have the colorful conversation and you can hear both perspectives, then you can make an informed decision. And I always tell people this: the role of the media is not to educate, it's to inform. It's up to us as the consumer to take the next step and educate ourselves. So if you can only educate yourself on one perspective, then your view is going to be distorted. But if you have two perspectives that you can educate yourself on once you've been informed, then you're in a better position to make a more informed decision about how you see the world versus the way one person sees the world or the way your parents saw the world,
I love it. Okay. So then on the content producing side, is this for little tiny shows like mine or the big media? Is this everything in between? Like what segment are you hitting first on the B2B side?
Okay, yeah, for sure. So I do want to, it is for everyone. Ultimately, I see this being the thing that revolutionizes how we do media relations. Like I'm a big dreamer, thinker, and doer, right? But initially what we see starting is our total addressable market starting out. We're going to start with local radio and TV, and it's for two reasons. One is because the volume that's done in those markets is very high right now.
Yep.
And they are usually understaffed or under-resourced, right? And so we're actually allowing them to find the diverse perspectives and have them booked on air more easily, right? Which will actually ease a lot of the pain for them because they do have limited resources, right? So that's one thing. The other piece of it, local radio and TV, it goes back to your original point about these amazing subject matter experts who may not be ready for media. The best way to get prepared for network media is just like basketball. You play JV before you play varsity, right? So, the local markets is JV, right? You can get in, you can get your feet wet, you can learn what your voice is in the media landscape. You can be really effective also in your target market, right? So if you're a OBGYN in the Baltimore, Washington, DC area, it's more impactful for your business and your brand to do local media because the people who hear you will be able to drive into your office, right? And so starting in a local media market as well will have a lot of impact for the experts and their businesses where they can see tangible returns on their investment in utilizing the technology. So we do see the total addressable market initially, the entry point as local radio and TV. And just to give you a little context, local radio and TV, they do about 750 bookings a year, right? About 6 a day in the morning shows alone. And so we see it as an opportunity for people to book guests consistently and frequently, and also to give those experts the much needed airtime that they deserve, but also that'll rev them up for more national markets.
I love it. Love it. All right. Where can the content producers learn more about EBO?
They can go to Expert Bookings Online. Very easy. expertbookingsonline.com. Anyone who has any questions for me, they can email me at crystal@expertbookingsonline.com. But more importantly, I think one thing that one of my favorite quotes, Will, I always like to include this in every conversation, is by James Baldwin. And it says, not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced, right? And I live by that. If we really want to have impact, whether it's in venture capital, whether it's in technology, whether it's in education, whatever space, knowing that we have to face these things in order to change them. So if we never face it, if we never are solutions driven, then none of these things will be changed in our society. So I just want to encourage people to use their voice, use their influence, use their dollars, their impact to make a difference, because trust and believe every little piece of the puzzle, the work that you do with Proda, the work that I'm doing with EBO, I know it's going to make a difference in the lives of so many people. So just do your part.
Love it. Love it. Crystal, thanks for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me, Will.
All right, a couple quick things before you go. Number one, I have a general newsletter where I write about technology and startups and health science and teaching people to code. And I write about a variety of different subjects that we talk about on this show. So if you go to wclittle.com, there you'll be able to subscribe, and you'll also be able to subscribe to particular topics. If you're just interested in one or a few of them, you'll be notified right when I publish new content in those areas. Number two, my partners and I at Proda Ventures have a portfolio company called Startup Rocket. If you go to startuprocket.com, there you'll be able to receive coaching guides and customize an operations framework for you and your team and your advisors to be on the same page in terms of what is the appropriate next step for you and your entrepreneurial journey. And finally, if you wouldn't mind leaving a review anywhere that you have listened to this podcast or watched this podcast, it would be super helpful to help those who might be interested in consuming this content as well. Thank you.